The Front Row Back Row podcast is a show where two grad school buddies discuss physical therapy entrepreneurship. I helped guide a company to an 8-figure exit, and I'm now starting my own mobile company. Brian grew his mobile practice to 4 clinics, and he's now doing $1 million in revenue. Join us as we help you grow your own business. Hello and welcome to the Front Row Back Row podcast. My name is Dr. Owen Campbell with Simplify Motion Physical Therapy in Phoenix, Arizona. And with me, as always, is Dr. Brian Wolf in, Connecticut, Long Island, Hawaii eventually. I don't know. Like you're all over the place. I know, right? It's a lot of travel.
We have a joke that Evolution Puerto Rico will one day happen. That'll be
oh my,
next.
That would be excellent. The clinic would only be open like a month out of the year because that's the only,
exactly.
You just use it as a vacation.
Yeah, exactly.
So today, as you may have found out as you look at our Apple Podcasts and I think on our Spotify's coverage, our YouTube has changed, that we are now the Front Row Back Row podcast presented by PhysioGrowth. So if you are ready to elevate your physical therapy practice, you want to join PhysioGrowth, where we mentor PTs to boost their income, build successful practices, and thrive in the business of healing. Visit school.com/physiogrowth-mentorship-group. That's it.
Nice.
No.com. I know. Hey,
I'll do it better. Don't worry.
Oh my God. All right. And start growing today. We got a long, we got
the website funky a little bit, but we'll get it.
Website gets you. Yeah. There
the
you
school
go.
Group is school with a K. That's I got a low. Physiogroup-mentorship-group.
We will definitely work on that. I kind of sounded like, I don't know, Bob Barker's announcer for the first few parts. It's a deep cut for all you old PTs. Okay. So today we are going to be talking, we got a question in the school group about managing your time. So this individual reached out and the question, and I mean, Brian, you were the one that handled it more directly, but because you were the one on the Q&A that day, but what was the issue here was that they were talking about managing their time to grow, correct?
Yeah. So a lot of times what happens for most people, and I've watched with several businesses, I went through it myself too, is as you're growing, listen, physical therapy, personal training, fitness, all those things are a time for money occupation, right? Like that is what we do. We trade our time for money. So I don't care who you are. I don't care at what point, there's a point where you're going to run out of time, right? And so you have to figure out where to default as you grow, what you need to be doing, right? And I think, listen, I made mistakes as we do this, like PSA, like I did not do this perfectly. I'm at a point now where I'm managing my time much more effectively and better and figuring out where to go. But ultimately, the thing that you need to be spending your time on is whatever is bottlenecking your business. And so that is an important part. If you're not doing that, then in theory, your business won't grow. So go ahead.
So you say whatever is bottlenecking your business. I think it's important to be able to identify what that is. So if you are busy, you are seeing a bunch of patients, people love you, getting 1 or 2 referrals a day or 1 or 2 referrals a week, your schedule's full. How do you know what that bottleneck is, right? Because right now I got a bunch of people who love me. What's the problem?
For sure. I mean, I think when I would say this, like, I think if anybody, like if I'm you, right, let's take you, because I feel like a lot of people who start in physical therapy practices, don't start with a venture capitalist that drops a bunch of money on them that they can just launch a location, right? Or if they can, they start small. So when you start small like that and going to people's homes or anything like that, the biggest thing I would say is obviously getting patients. You want to focus on getting patients as much as possible. The piece that then you want to offload next are all the things that essentially are causing more time that you can't see more patients. So like bookkeeping, bookkeeping's one easy one that I would get rid of. Accounting stuff, obviously. Any type of like virtual assistant we've talked about in the past. So like making sure that scheduling is streamlined as much as possible. Even borderline like sales to a certain degree, right? And like website development, all that stuff we talked about, SEO, off your plate. Is because you're focusing on driving revenue for the business, which at the moment is you scheduling as much as possible. Once you've maximized that and you're treating enough, and again, like this comes into pricing, as we've kind of talked about, is how to raise your rates and making sure that you're raising your rates accordingly. If you don't have enough time and you're like, but I can't make more money and I can't take the money and do X, Y, and Z to take the next step, that means you got to raise your rates. You keep raising your rates until you can. And so what you do is there's 2 ways to do it. You can raise your rates all together, which if you're that busy where you're like, oh crap, like I don't have a way to get busier, right?
Mhm.
And to a point where like, I'm sorry, I'm too busy that I can't add more clients. That means you got to raise your rates. And so you raise it and raise it and raise it and raise it for everybody, in my opinion, until you get to a critical mass where now you can make that move, right?
Mhm.
On the flip side, say you're like, hey, I don't really want to raise my rates right off the bat on everybody. Like, I'm nervous, I'm scared. Totally normal. That's everybody who's scared, which in reality, like, if you raise the rates on everybody, you're probably only going to lose 30% of your clients, which means you probably make
Yep.
more money anyway and have less and have more time. But nevertheless, don't get me started on that debate. As far as, here's me saying it, but that said, on the flip side, if you wanted to start with having an increased rate, what you do is you increase the rate for most people and then
Mhm.
say, hey, as we're increasing the rate for everybody, or at least or any of our new people at 50% capacity, when 50% of your clients are now on that new rate, you switch everybody over. And now you've reduced the fact that like if 30% of those
Mhm.
50% leave, it's only 30 out of 50%, right? And so
Yeah.
therefore, even if 50% of your 50% left, you only lost 25% of people, right?
And in in our mentorship group, we actually have a module that goes through this and a bunch of things. And one of the modules I did is a 20-minute discussion on how to raise rates and how to do it smoothly, right? So what Brian is straight out of he's basically quoting that with making sure that you're able to know when to raise them, right? When you've offloaded all your time, you're just seeing people, and you're still you can't work on the business, and then making sure that you have a plan in place for the existing people. So, okay, so the person now, to answer this person's question, will say, okay, raise your rates, right? So that'll
Yep.
buy you some more
That's step
time,
one.
right? That's step one. Then what do we get? So I'm okay, I'm busy and I got a higher price, maybe a few more hours in the week, right?
Yeah.
Because 30% of people dropped off. Now what?
Now, here's the question that I posed, and I would pose to everybody, right? What is your goal of the business? When everybody gets to
Mhm.
this point, and I'll give you a great example when we were at first. So, because I'll tell you our story, right? So, at
Mhm.
this point in our business, when we were at this point, when my wife and I were both evolution or not evolution, we're Wolf Physical Therapy. This is where my partner and I decided, hey, this is a good time to merge and do something and build it together, right? And then we merged our businesses. There was the capital to grow, bang, and the rest is history, right? So you can do
Mhm.
something like that, right? Where you find people and you do that, right? I'm very fortunate. I know Mike probably listens to this podcast. He's my guy. We're very close. Oh, and you know him well. Like that.
Mhm.
That was an amazing way for us to do it. And obviously, I wouldn't do it any other way. Like I enjoy work with him. Love him to death. And obviously, what we're doing has been very profitable and successful. So that's one way to do it. Right? Is find somebody
Mhm.
who can do that. Another way to do it is just to keep raising your prices. Now I got this money. Now you have a leap that you have to take, right? And
Mhm.
I think this leap probably means you're taking a salary cut of some capacity and
Mhm.
investing that money in your future for your asset. And so if it's to create an asset, it's either getting a location, hiring another physical therapist full time. I'm a big believer, and you got to take the leap to hire the employee full time, guys. Because if you 1099 people or part time people, the problem that occurs is when you have that happen, ultimately the problem becomes is they're just not bought into what you are and your mission. So
Mhm.
I don't
Yep.
love hiring part-time people. I've just never had a successful piece. So to hire somebody full-time will help you, but again, you got to invest in them and you got to take it on the chin a little bit for the first 3 to 4 months.
And that's where I think it's really important. And we talked about in the last podcast about like leaps of faith and making sure that your parachute is your skill, right? Your parachute is the fact that like you've prepared for this, you're ready for this. And I think that we call it, in financial terms, they call it dry powder, right?
Yeah.
Where you, instead of you just taking whatever the business makes those 2 weeks and putting it towards your house or vacation or whatever, you stay diligent on, I will put away X amount per week towards having this kind of war chest of money. And then in that war chest of money, you should be able to, if you're mobile and you want to stay mobile, that's where you spend, quote unquote, spend your money on hiring an employee, because there are some upfront costs, right? You have to make sure that you go to your bank and figure out how to do payroll, and spend a little bit more time with your CPA and maybe even a lawyer at this point to figure out, is you're an employer, right, to get a full-time employee. But then also you want to think, okay, do I want a space? Right? Am I mobile? Do I want a space? And then that, I think, is also an interesting question.
Yeah.
And now, am I to understand you that you would want the employee first, Like, say, let's just
I
say if
mean,
someone's mobile.
I think it really depends on, and I would pose this question to anybody. I remember talking about this with my wife. I remember talking about this. I would pose the question to anybody: what do you want out of this business? What's your vision?
Mhm.
Is it a cash flow business or an asset business? Cash flow
Yeah.
business, guys, if you're running out of time, just keep raising your rates all the time. Don't stop.
There's
And again,
there's a guy in my neighborhood who's 450 an hour and he's
yeah,
booked, right?
yeah.
Like
I mean,
he's
Owen, you know,
he's doing fine.
yeah, I mean, exactly. Like this is something fun. You go to 450, 550, 650. Like I don't think there's any. I think if you're busy in this case, to just keep going up and up and up is totally fine, right? Like that's not a
Mhm,
problem. And so, that's if you're wanting to do that. Now,
mhm,
that being said, on the flip side, right? If you want to go to a point where you want to create an asset, that is where like you got to think about, okay, what's the future look like? And
mhm,
those employees need to help you, the first few employees or the space or any of those next decisions. All right, how do I make more money long term? How
mhm.
do I drive the profitability of this long term? What are the steps I need to do with that? And what do I want to do? Right?
Yeah,
Not even what you want to do within the business. What do I want to do to drive that investment? Right? In theory, because that's what
yeah,
you're doing. Right? It's no different than investing in the stock. I'm putting money
yeah,
away now so that this company can grow in the future. And that is a very
yeah.
important thing. And so you just have to be prepared for that, right?
I think that's an important point when you talk about the mentality of it, right? Like, what do you want? Everyone, if you ask everybody, do you want to make money? The answer is always yes, right?
Yeah.
But what do you want your life to look like in the next 4, 5, 10, 20 years? Are you one of these guys or gals that is saving acorns in the tree, for the winter, or are you someone who says, you know what, whatever, I want the cash now, I'm good? And there's a lot of different ways that you can talk about that. Those are very personal decisions, and Brian has an excellent way for you to be able to
Ah,
make
you
that.
stole my
See, I
thunder.
transitioned to
There
the
you
ad
go. You
read.
did it. You did it. But just to remind you all, this podcast is brought to you by PhysioGrowth. Transform your physical therapy career with PhysioGrowth. We mentor PTs to unlock higher income, build thriving practices, and master the business side of care. Start your journey at school.com/physiogrowth mentorship group.
Ooh, stuck the landing. Okay.
Always.
Got Simone Biles over
Well
here.
done. Exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
So,
There you go.
and I mean but that is important, right? Is to know what you want, and our individualized coaching will be able to help you talk through that, right? And especially even our Q&A sessions, they're $12 a month for a
Well, and
weekly
you nailed
Q&A
it.
session.
You talked about this on one of the things that I've realized and that I've realized over time is business is just about, like we talked about in the beginning of this podcast, is unbottlenecking problems.
Hmm.
Business is two things: it's math and unbottlenecking problems. That's it. And so,
Hmm.
what this group's all about is helping people, right, unbottleneck those problems, and that's what we do in our Q&A session. So we have an example of that. If you go to that website that I just read, then it
Perfectly. He read
you know
it
exactly.
perfectly.
So that way, then you could see for Owen what we actually put an example of me doing it for Owen, right? And just talking about it. So, we're doing these problems now. And and again, I'm still having these conversations with my company now, right? We're now trying to uncork, like, how do we, a big problem that we're having in our business that we're trying to fix. We have tons of patients that come to across the country into our business, and we have a fitness business that does not seem to get any referrals from the physical therapy side. And we have a
Hmm.
built-in referral machine there. So we're trying to figure out how to get physical therapists to refer into our fitness thing. And the answer
Hmm.
we think that we've tried to figure out is our physical therapists need to be better salespeople within our company to do that. And
Yeah.
so we're talking about building these sales modules and these sales processes so we can do that, right? And so ultimately that's where you start to think about more about this concept of how do we help ourselves? How do we build a business? How do we keep building it? It's just thinking, all right, what's the next solution to this problem? And how do we fix it? Right. And
And,
that's it.
and that's so and then okay, so let's talk about the problem that we have at hand then now. So
Yeah.
let's say, and I think a lot of people listening to this, will want to go the business asset route. Also, I mean, the answer is just raising prices. We kind of end our episode at 14 minutes. So,
Yeah, exactly. exactly.
uh,
Exactly.
but a lot of people listening to this do want to grow an asset. They want to have something that they can sell. So then I guess, I mean, really, would you go employee first or would you go brick and mortar? Right. And I mean, is that something that's entirely dependent on your location? My thought is that if I'm mobile and I am busy, but I'm driving 25 miles each way, then maybe I want that employee first, right? To get a little bit more capital so that it's less of a risk to go brick and mortar. But at the same time, if I'm busy, then a brick and mortar may help me to be a little bit more efficient with my time, maybe even start taking insurances that make way more sense when you're in a brick and mortar location versus driving to people. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Again, I think here's the creativity part, and this is why I love this. Is it really just depends on what your goals are, right? If
Yeah.
I'm an outpatient orthopedic practice and I want to have more outpatient orthopedic people and I want to practice in there, I would actually think that the space is more important personally.
Okay.
And I would look to sublet space because the reality is if I'm going to hire another physical therapist, I think you can hire employees and stay mobile
Mhm.
until you're going to hire another physical therapist. But here's the problem. If I'm going to hire employees and raise my overhead and not have people that are going to be raising and bringing in money into the business, what's going to happen is when I like think about this, and a really great another great book I've been reading and I've just been quoting it constantly is Simon Sinek Start with Why, right? And so if you
Yeah,
look at
yeah.
great companies, right, and everybody knows who Simon Sinek, and you've probably seen him on the internet. He's a great marketer. You start with why, because that's why people are going to follow you in your vision. So you're going to
Mhm.
hire a physical therapist. So if I'm a mobile PT like Nolan, and by the way I was, and then I went in a brick and mortar. If I hire a physical therapist to do mobile PT and then try and push them into a brick and mortar, there's going to be I'm going to confuse my message a little bit. And so what's going to happen
Mhm.
is you can do it, but it's most likely not that PT is probably going to leave, because eventually
Yeah.
what's going to happen is that PT is going to be like, well, I kind of like to, and again, because you're hiring somebody for a different job, you're hiring them in a
Mhm.
mobile PT job, and then you're putting them in the clinic, right?
Yeah.
Unless you're fully transparent about that. Like, I'm going to have you start at people's homes. And again, this is to find somebody, who essentially you're looking for, who's going to grow with you. So
Mhm.
ultimately, what you want to do is say, hey, I personally, if I want to go the outpatient route, I'm opening up a location
Yeah.
personally, and I'm trying to drive most of my people back to my location. I'll tell you this, I'm going to shout out to my wife. My wife, I think, did this beautifully, in that she raised her rates at the same exact time when she opened up her location. So
Mhm.
when she did that, she raised her rates and said, "These are my rates. If you don't come to me, if you come to me, you can have the old rates." Bang! And brought
Yeah,
brought
there
a
you go.
lot of people into her clinic. People were like, "All right, I'll come see you. That's fine." And
Yeah.
then so what it did was it kind of split her 50-50 to start. I thought that was a really and then you can find really good spaces. Like, there's ways to find. You got to be
Oh, yeah.
crafty, but you can
Do you
find them.
The amount of times that I've gone to like a networking group and everyone's like, "Oh, you're a therapist, you're mobile. Would you like to sublease my back
Yeah,
office?" We've
I
we've talked
bet.
to the we've talked about this on a podcast before, where I had a guy basically his cleaning closet. He had a great gym, I mean, beautiful gym, but like his cleaning closet by the bathrooms, he wanted to sublease. So
Yeah,
it's not a hard thing to get something like that, and usually for a relatively reasonable
for sure,
rate. I mean, otherwise they wouldn't be making any money on it. So whatever you give them, there's
for
only a
sure.
few. There's only a few people who'll take it, right?
Yeah,
So that I think is a really good kind of thought process, right? Because on the other hand, on the other side of what Kelly did, what your wife did, is that I have a buddy who I've asked him, and he's like, "Dude, I tried the space thing. I hate it. I only want to be mobile. I just
it's
want my
awesome.
entire business to be mobile." And he has just gone right into part time. I think he 1099. He's either part time or 1099 somebody, um, to start with the promise of being full time as they grow. And he's just looking at it as, I got to onboard this person. I got to find
Yeah,
those time things that we talked about earlier in the episode of how do I get it so I have a few hours to speak with her about what I plan for the business and what I want to do. And not to mention, how do I have a little bit of, even in mobile, if you don't have a lot of fixed costs, you still are going to lose business because
totally.
you need to train this person, right? So you're going to have a little bit of cash on the back burner to be able to kind of weather the storm of that person building up their own caseload.
I
So
would I
I
would
think it's a
also.
fascinating thing.
So you also said something that I would change. So again, like, here's my problem with 1099. Something that Owen just said, like building up their own caseload. So if
Mhm.
you're mobile and you're 1099, what's to stop the person from just being like, I'm doing all the work? Why don't I just like take the patients and then leave? And that
Mhm.
will happen, right? That will happen.
Yeah.
The thing is, what I would argue that eventually you're going to want to open your own space, and because at some point, like, I'm responsible for advertising. That's why I do our advertising, our sales, and all that stuff, because I don't want anybody knowing about our advertising, right? Like,
Yeah.
I know how we advertise. I'm really good at it. I want to continue to maintain that, because ultimately, even if someone took all my business and left, I can still build it again because I know how to
Yeah.
do it. So
Yep.
that's the thing that's actually like a thing for personal trainers and people who are, learn how to acquire customers. Because if you're not learning how to acquire customers and you go and you leave somebody, now you've created an enemy, and ultimately you still don't know how to acquire customers. So now what happens is, say those patients all of a sudden fall off. Now you're like, oh crap, now what do I do? Right. And so
Yep.
the ultimate piece of this is how to acquire customers. That's why I focus so hard on it, because I know God forbid something happened, I could rebuild again if I had to.
Yeah.
So that to me is a huge piece. And so again, like, to talk about your friend here with the mobile practice, I would then hire employees first, and I would try and
Okay.
stack a couple employees, but I would get prepared to get a location. I would even think about, and this is something to think about too, because my wife and I talked about this one point before we did all the stuff that we've done, obviously Evolution did in person, but was like, maybe we buy a home that has like an office where you could have some employees go, right?
Yeah.
Which, don't quote me on this, but I'm sure there's tax benefits to that. But in
Yeah.
terms of like obviously doing that, you could do some of that where you could run at your home. I know Bridgewater did that. But Bridgewater is a multi-billion-dollar company with billions of dollars in assets as a hedge fund. I know Ray Dalio ran it out of his like house for a while. He had 6
Yeah.
employees and started out of his house. So like, you can run $1 billion company. Jeff Bezos is notorious for running right a bookstore out of his garage. He said that. If you go on YouTube, you'll find him. Like, right. And so there's plenty of $1 billion, $1 trillion companies that start that way. So that's another thing to think about.
Front row, back row podcast is not a CPA or a lawyer. Please consult your own.
No, that's amazing. Listen, I'm saying that, forget the tax piece, like what Owen's kind of like joking about. And in all seriousness, you probably can have a pretty good tax piece, but in terms of, I'm sure, but in terms of overhead, right? Because that's people's concern. People's concern are, but how do I spend X amount of dollars on a space, right? Well, like Jeff Bezos did out of his garage, right?
Yeah.
Ray Dalio, read his
You
book
don't need
Principles.
3,000 square feet.
No, read his book, especially if you're a friend, if you're a buddy. Like, we kicked around this idea if we were going to stay mobile. I think if I had done it and I'd stayed mobile, what I would have done is I would have made like a headquarters out of somewhere in my house, and I would have hired employees that I trusted. But again, you're not going to need a ton of employees. So like Ray Dalio's thing was like he had 6 employees that I think were in his house. And again, don't quote me right. Read his book Principles. It's a really cool story. He's like in his house. And he goes, honestly, it made us super close. We were like family. He goes, we built all of our systems, all of our computer systems, and as we grew. We started a strip mall, and now, I've seen Bridgewater. I've been there. It's a gigantic building now, a standalone building. So you can start something like that out of your house, and essentially, basically be like running multiple physical therapists and having schedulers. Like, people do this all the time, right?
Oh yeah.
It's not what I did.
know.
And it's not what I would choose to do. Just from a standpoint of that, again, coming back to the original question, I would figure out, what do I want to do with this business? What do I want to?
Yeah. And I think that's it. And the nice part is that's the cool thing about being, especially speaking to physical therapists, but other disciplines. When you're the decision maker, you're not an assistant, you're not, whatever, is that you can be autonomous and you can take it wherever you want, right? And there are smart ways of doing it. But I think it will always come back to, if you want to be brick and mortar, if you want to be mobile, if you want to be whatever, right? You have to find time when you're busy to give yourself more time. So raise rates and optimize processes, raise rates, buy yourself back some of that time, and then focus that time on building up your business, learning how to acquire customers, and then building up that kind of financial war chest so that you can deploy it how you want to, right? Because that's the thing, is you got to do it how you want to. And those are I think kind of key ways that if we were to talk with this guy who was asking, how do I build from, how do I build into a multi-center place? I mean, that would be, I think that's a pretty good game plan, but you got to keep your head in wherever you want to be.
Yeah, and I agree. And Owen's using the war chest, but I also want to make it clear that, like, it doesn't necessarily be like I need to save up all this money and then be able to just invest it back in my business. I think it could also be cash flow based, right? Like, if you have an extra part of cash, like I would actually prefer to be more cash flow based. Consider like, hey, I'm making now an extra $6,000 to $10,000 in my business every month, or hey, I'm making an extra 3 or 4, and now I'm just going to take $3,000 or $4,000 less. Yes, I know it's going to hurt, but that's how
Mhm.
you can also hire your full-time PT, right? So
Yeah.
you could do that too. And so that's the idea. But again, Owen, I know there's a great way for us to do this and teach people like that as well. Maybe you want to tell the people about it.
Well, and I think the personalization is really what's key. So if you want your PT practice to go to the next level, at Physiogrowth, we guide physical therapists to financial success and practice growth. Visit school/physiogrowth-mentorship-group and grow your future today.
He got it.
Oh.
There we go. I remember when I learned to
Ah,
read. Nice.
oh, come on, come on.
Well
All
done.
right.
Well done.
All right. All right. Well, and with that, we are going to end the show, my friend. Have a good Thursday.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. See ya.
All right. See ya.